Hey, thanks for being with us. I'm Dan Haggerty. This is The Story. This is the show that wants to hear from you. We listen to your feedback and we figure out what this community wants to see in a newscast, what you want to see us cover and how you want to see us cover it. Then we take it from there. Please reach out. Use all the information you see at the bottom of your screen. You can email us at thestory@kgw.com. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram, or as always, use Twitter and the hashtag HeyDan. Let's get started. Our big story tonight is about an idea that could make a real impact on Portland's homeless crisis. Kitty Hawk tweeted at our Maggie Vespa and said, "It just seems elementary that the city should identify and designate legal encampment areas and then provide on-site portable toilets, showers, laundry facilities, mental health counseling, and addiction services." She added, "Could you report on why that hasn't happened yet?" Brian, another viewer, took it a step further. He forwarded an email that he sent to the Portland Housing Commissioner and added, "Hey, Dan, I hadn't heard any progress on the Safe Rest Villages, so I reached out to Commissioner Ryan's office. There's no progress, and they haven't even started." He added, "Please look into how these camps can be ready by the end of the month or even the end of the year." Brian and Kitty, thanks to both of you. Great questions. You both have been paying attention to what's going on in this city, and they're both right. The city is planning on opening these legal sanctioned camps called Safe Rest Villages to help get people off the streets. Now, earlier this year, Commissioner Ryan said that he wanted to have them open this month, but the debut has been delayed to the end of this year. To top it all off, this week we learned a camp that's already housing dozens of people has been told it's got to move. Here's Maggie Vespa.
In a city already struggling to provide housing, shelters, even just empty land where people can camp, a village successfully housing dozens has to find a new address fast. It's called Queer Affinity Village. It sits at Southeast Main and Water, and the city and county opened it last year to give homeless people in the LGBTQ community somewhere safe to live during the pandemic. It seemed simple. The city owns this land, but now there's a problem. As the Portland Tribune first reported, the city signed a deal long ago to let a developer turn this property into office buildings, and the work is supposed to start soon, ideally next month.
There is some time there. They are not looking to kick off the village that is on that property on October 1st. They want
Dennis Thuralt with the Joint Office of Homeless Services says officials knew this was coming. This site was always supposed to be temporary, as was the one across the street. Officials have already moved another village for Black and Indigenous people to a new property in the Lloyd district.
When those sites were developed, last spring, we didn't think COVID would still be with us like it is now, the Delta variant.
But COVID is still with us. And while there's no new data to prove it, Portland's housing crisis appears worse than ever. Finding new land, Thuralt admitted, won't be easy, but they're working on it. We asked people here in this village if they wanted to talk to us about basically having to move, and we were told, not right now. They say they're still processing all of this, and they're not really interested in doing interviews. Despite the uncertainty, in recent interviews, homeless people have told us they want more camps and villages like this. It gives those on the streets a more organized option. This man didn't want to show his face, but was adamant. Outdoor villages, he says, are the answer. Do you feel like a lot of people would use that?
Yeah, as long as it was humane and you still have your freedom and stuff, I'm sure, a lot of people would.
And the city promised months ago that was coming. Back in June, Housing Commissioner Dan Ryan announced the city was using $20 million in federal COVID aid to open 6 organized camps across Portland. He called them Safe Rest Villages and said this on our air.
And so if we could have 6 of these villages up and running by the end of September, that's a step in the right direction.
The end of September, that's just a couple of weeks from now. And the city has yet to announce locations for these villages, let alone open one. To be fair, Commissioner Ryan's office has shifted that target date to the end of the year, but they never told us why. Last week, we began asking for a sit down with the commissioner, and Thursday, he carved out some time.
And so for people sitting at home and they're wondering, what's the holdup? Why did that plan not pan out? What's the answer to that?
Yeah, we said we would start the building of them this month. And as I recall, the promise was that we would have them open for people to reside in, where they can receive their services by the end of the calendar year.
When asked about his initial statement about opening the villages by the end of September, the commissioner said he believes he misspoke, and they're actually supposed to be open by the end of the year. He says the city has hired 4 staffers to help run these villages, and his office will start releasing addresses for at least some of the sites next week.
For those, again, who are sitting at home, and just because we hear from them a lot, your constituents, and they heard months ago that this was a plan. They heard that these villages were going to be on city-owned land. They heard that the money was there because it's federal COVID aid. And they're wondering, couldn't this be moving faster? Like, we have an emergency. Couldn't this be going faster? What would you say to that just generally?
Well, you have total alignment with the entire city council, with the county commissioners as partners, and we have a great team in place all within 2 months. And I think that they will be hopefully remain supportive and helpful as we do some really tough work to get these up and running by the end of the calendar year. This is a complex, humane challenge. This is a humanitarian crisis, as people know, and that takes complex, methodical solutions. We're on the right step. We're taking action. We're doing what Portlanders are asking us to do. And I'm thrilled that we have the team in place so we can get this action moving.
So once again, the update tonight, Commissioner Ryan says Portland is on track to open those safe rest villages this year. And we are expecting addresses on at least 2 of the locations next week. Dan?
We'll be watching the calendar, Maggie. Thank you.
Sure.
Now, I want to show you something on a map really quickly. I like geography. I know a lot of people don't. A lot of people, geography is not the thing. But I really think that it helps people to understand a story sometimes when you can use visual cues. So, okay, let's pull up the map and let's zoom in down into Texas, right on the coast, all right, just across the bay from Corpus Christi. That is a small coastal town called Portland. About 15,000 people. Now, if you're watching this and you work on our city council here, you might be thinking, Portland, home sweet home. But no, see, that's Portland, Texas. I know, it's tricky. Let's zoom back, and now you can see, there we are. That's our Portland, okay, all the way up in Oregon. You can see it's easier to make out the difference when you look at it that way. Still, Portland City Council seems awfully focused on the Lone Star State and its politics ever since Texas decided to essentially outlaw abortions. And to fight that new law in Texas, this morning, our city council here in Portland, Oregon, voted 4-1 to set aside $200,000 in funding to fund abortion care in Oregon, because they think that we may see an uptick in Texans traveling here for abortions, which kind of may sound like a bit of a stretch. They didn't show any data that could show why they think that might happen. We did find this map from Planned Parenthood that coincides with our own research and shows that 3 out of the 4 states that border Texas have strict laws surrounding abortion, with only New Mexico having the same rules as Oregon, though to be fair, you'll find more relaxed abortion laws in every state outside of Texas. For instance, you could go to Portland, Maine. You get my point. And I'm sorry, I know, the map thing. I like geography. No more maps, I promise. Okay, I lied. One more. How about Mingus Maps? The newly elected commissioner who ran on a platform to rebuild the city, and the only commissioner to vote no on the 200K.
The challenge before us, I think, today is an unjust law in the state of Texas. And I think unjust laws require either legislative or judicial responses. I think our goal here should not be just a symbolic pushback. I think that we should lean into the elements of this ordinance which actually launch a meaningful legal and policy challenge to the unjust anti-abortion law in Texas. I, on the other hand, frankly, am genuinely mystified by what we're trying to accomplish with this $200,000 allocation.
No one seemed to have a great answer to that last bit there. I mean, except for the obvious. It will fund something that the city believes in, and it is this statement to Texas, this big statement that they've been trying to make, I guess. You know, I don't know that this statement will be making front page news down there, or at least not the way that they think. After all, the city did get national headlines last week when council proposed this plan to boycott Texas that was later abandoned when everyone discovered that they didn't actually have a plan. Council never even considered what a boycott would do or even look like. Which brings us to our quote of the day from OPB reporter Rebecca Ellis, who wrote, "The press release appeared to have come long before the policy making." Ah, press before policy. Some people might refer to that as pandering, especially when the policy never actually follows through after all the press that it gets. So, with that said, what will this $200,000 actually do? Well, they don't know yet, which isn't unusual when it comes to grant money. This fall, council will divvy out the funds to programs and services related to reproductive health care, which is a pretty wide net, I think. Council also plans to write letters to state lawmakers and write letters to the White House and get the city attorney to do what they can do to help challenge the law in Texas. Now, why don't we spend some time and shift our focus back to the Newburgh School Board, because there's just been way too much going on down there this week. We told you yesterday a group of students apparently created a group on Snapchat called, and I'll quote here, "Slave Trade," where they joked about how much participants would pay for their black classmates in a slave auction. Unsurprisingly enough, many Newburgh parents say that their children don't feel safe in school there. And not just because of this horrific Snapchat auction, but because the school district is still arguing about whether or not to allow Black Lives Matter and pride flags and other displays. New language developed by the board last week even goes a step further by banning any political, quasi-political, or controversial display that isn't part of the approved curriculum. Supporters of this ban say all this back and forth is just distracting kids from schools. So let's take a minute and listen to a little bit of a 4-hour-long Zoom meeting last night.
The idea that there's some systemic level of racism because somebody in, a kid makes a really poor decision and a bad decision, and that needs to be addressed if that's what happened. That doesn't mean that the town is some horrible systemically racist thing. And everybody that keeps making this claim never, ever gives any evidence of it. Never. Because, we just want our kids to go to school, be taught to read, write, do arithmetic, and come home. And, and everything seems to be the opposite of that.
First, the idea that there isn't racism in Newburgh. Let's break this down into two things. First, Newburgh. I just heard you solved racism. Congratulations. Please, can you share your secret? Second, pick up your remote and rewind to the part about the Snapchat thing. Yes, this was a kid making a poor decision, but it was also wildly racist. And let's talk about the idea that kids are only in school to read, write, and do math. Well, the school psychiatrist for Newburgh spoke up here, saying that the ban is going to make it harder for kids who are already having a hard time at school to be able to do the reading and the writing and the mathematics.
Statistics show that our LGBTQ students are at a much higher risk for mental health problems, including self-harm and suicide. We know about the negative outcomes for racism, for both physical and mental health, for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We often use words like marginalized to describe these groups. What this truly means is that these students wake up every day knowing they are at higher risk for being bullied, ridiculed, harassed, or even killed because of their skin color or sexual orientation or identity. For too many, it is their lived reality. One of the biggest risk factors for major mental health problems is not having a person students feel they can turn to. Signage helps create emotional safety for our students. It helps them know that here in this place, this person acknowledges you and is here to protect all students.
The board never actually got around to reading the new language for the ban last night. last night. They got caught up in arguing about all the other things there, like meeting procedures and hiring lawyers, and the school district superintendent who is saying that he's not going to enforce the ban at all because it's illegal. And now supporters of the ban are calling for him to be fired because of that. And the board has the power to do that. They can fire the superintendent. We've seen that happen at several other school districts across the state lately when the superintendents have refused to carry out the board's wishes. But in this case, it would be very expensive for them to do, and they're already facing lawsuits from both the teachers union and the ACLU. The board's meeting again in a few weeks. We'll let you know how it goes. In the meantime, let's do one of our favorite mathematical equations. That's where we count vaccines. More than 2.76 million Oregonians have gotten at least their first dose. So we are now at about 65.6% of the state's population who has gotten at least one shot, and that includes everybody, even kids who are under 12 who can't get the vaccine yet. In Washington, more than 5.32 million people have gotten at least their first dose, which was working out to be about 70% of the state's entire population, including kids. Well, apparently we've got even more murder hornets and at least a couple rabid bats, because we totally need this to think about on top of everything else. So maybe we should start looking at a different planet, which is exactly what NASA is doing as they try to get to Mars, with their first stop on the way being Central Oregon.
This type of tech has to be tested in an actual realistic field environment, so that's why we came to Oregon.
When the story continues. Oh, hey, you're back. I'm back too. Thanks. I was just thinking about some of the comments that I just read a second ago, which I'm going to address at the end of the show, and they kind of rattle around in my head a little bit before I figure out what to say. So please keep sending stuff in and keep causing my brain to short circuit. You can write them into the story at kgw.com or use that hashtag HeyDan on Twitter. Another thing, also, please don't forget about our Hey Help campaign. This week, we are asking you to please consider donating to With Love. They help support foster families in Oregon by providing them with resources that they need, things like blankets and books and diapers. Imagine families that need those things and how badly they do need them. So if you want to help out, please just open up the camera on your phone, point it at the QR code you see on your screen. That will take you to a donation page. If you don't have your phone handy, please go to kgw.com/heyhelp. There was a lot going on in the world, obviously. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that. But sometimes it just seems like things are getting to be a little too much. I think it's time now for another edition of This Is Fine. Yeah, I know the dog was wearing Olympic medals and there was like an Olympic theme, but we made that before the Olympics and we just haven't had time to change it. So you're okay with that, right? Anyway, first up, not one, but two rabid bats have been discovered in the Portland area in the past week. This is a big deal. You might be saying, is this a big deal? It is. One was found in northeast Portland after a dog was found playing with it. Ugh. And the first case of rabies in an animal in Multnomah County in 7 years is now upon us. The good news is the dog is up to date on its rabies vaccine and just got a booster shot. The bad news is someone else found another rabid bat inside their house in Beaverton. All the pets in that home also up to date on their vaccines. So for all of your pet owners out there, all you guys out there, please, good reminder, make sure your pets are up to date on their rabies shots. And if you see a bat or any other animal that appears to be sick, don't touch it, okay? Because rabies can spread through saliva. If they bite you, it's bad news. Instead, call the county animal services or county health. Next up is another animal story involving everyone's least favorite killer bee. I mean, it's not really a bee, but it's a hornet, and it's a murder hornet, so it's kind of a killer hornet. It's a murder hornet in Washington. They found more of them. Last week, the State Department of Agriculture found 2 more nests up by the Canadian border. They've eradicated one of them, and they're planning to get out there and eradicate the other one next week. The thing is, the state is pretty sure that there are more nests in rural areas by the border. I mean, why wouldn't there be, right? They keep popping up. This is what these things do. They think it will take years to actually eradicate them if they can ever. By the way, if you forgot, these murder hornets here, they're called that because of the way that they kill honeybee hives. They wipe them out entirely, which isn't great for the Save the Bees movement or for bees in general. And this is fine. Okay, so how many of you were around during the space race? If you were, you might remember that NASA actually used Central Oregon as a training ground of sorts for astronauts on the Apollo missions. Apparently, they thought that the landscape there was maybe possibly what the moon might be like. Well, now, decades later, NASA is trying to get to Mars. And to do so, they're going back to Central Oregon, testing out new spacesuits. Galen Etlin gives us a look.
These pictures show new spacesuits, but not in space just yet.
It would only take astronauts to train them in 5 places on Earth. So Oregon, in my view, would be in the top 5.
That's Dr. Pascal Lee, director of the NASA Houghton Mars Project. A crew of about 10 people came to Central Oregon in August to test this astronaut gear in rugged volcanic terrain.
This type of tech has to be tested in an actual realistic field environment. So that's why we came to Oregon.
Over jagged hills and into rocky caves, the Oregon expeditions near Bend, John Day, and Crater Lake gave astronauts a test run of what terrain is like on the moon. The goal is to make suits safer for lunar missions in the next decade.
The upshot is that it works really well. It works beautifully.
Highest peak on the rim of the caldera.
Oregon has a history of astronaut training. This KGW vault footage from the 60s shows trainees of the Apollo program getting used to volcanic rocks and craters.
Should see a manned moon landing within this decade. Ivan Smith reporting from Newberry Crater above Polino Lake.
Fast forward a few years to 1969.
This is the new Apollo helmet.
And space experts in the KGW studio explained the gear Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin would wear. Then finally, that fateful moon landing step watched live around the world.
One giant leap for mankind.
Made possible with preparation in Oregon. Back on Earth, Portlanders celebrated.
Unbelievable, and it's just marvelous that we've accomplished so much.
Thing is, by God, I never saw a thing in my life as wonderful it was.
I never thought it could happen.
I jumped up with joy. Yay.
Yay, indeed. It was no small feat, and now the dreams are even bigger. New suit technology is expanding possibilities.
We were blown away by the quality of all of them.
Dr. Lee says by the 2030s, he hopes astronauts can explore Mars using a little Oregon inspiration.
We thought this was really fitting.
Galen Etlin, KGW News.
Hey, we helped once. Why not keep it going? I do want to continue this space theme and the 60s throwback theme that we've got going here. Basically, because we recently dug up some footage of when Leonard Nimoy visited KGW to promote Star Trek back in 1967. Yeah, they didn't exactly have Zoom interviews back in the day. The internet wasn't a thing yet, so actors, they would actually come to the different cities and to the different stations on their press tours. So let's go back into the KGW vault to talk to Mr. Spock himself.
This is Leonard Nimoy, Mr. Spock, the co-star of Star Trek. I'd like to know what this role is that you play. Just what is the role that you're striving for?
Basically, Mr. Spock is a product of a marriage between an Earth woman and a Vulcan male. Vulcan is a planet outside of our solar system. And he's physically very similar to the human in anatomy, but his psychological and emotional orientation are quite different. He has complete emotional control. He's very scientifically oriented and is a very logical creature, you say. The point is that Vulcan was a planet that was very warlike and a very fierce race of people who almost did themselves in because they were always in conflict with each other and their emotions were so strong that they finally decided that emotion had to be done away with. And it became a wise choice to control emotions and gradually breed them out of the race so that they could function more logically and survive.
Well, you very seldom show emotion then. Is this
Very
difficult?
seldom. Well, you mean from an acting point of view?
Yes, from that.
Excuse me, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, but of course that's my job. Showing emotion or not showing emotion, whichever the case may be, is the actor's craft. You know, I'm often surprised when a man comes in to my house and can fix a leaky faucet, you know, that I've been working on perhaps for a couple hours and only managed to make it worse, you see. That's his craft. He comes in and does it. My craft is to play interesting and unusual characters.
I love this. I mean, who would have ever thought at that time that Star Trek would become such a phenomenon? And I hope all the Star Trek fans that are out there, so many of you got a real kick out of that interview. If you'd like to see some more, the whole thing's about 7 minutes long, and we have it at the KGW YouTube channel, so hop on and check it out. If you have any ideas for the Vault in the meantime, please let me know with the hashtag #HeyDan. All right, keep sending your questions and comments to the story at kgw.com. I'll read a few when we finish this thing up next. Just enough time for comments really quickly here. Rob hit me up on Twitter. He's a stickler for the details. He's a Star Trek fan. I did a little bit of the Live Long and Prosper earlier, the Dr. Spock thing, and he said, Dan, the thumb goes out. Aside from that, decent job. So, hey, you know what? The details matter here, folks. Thumb is out. What did I say, Dr. Spock? The version I know is he's been to medical school. And then Judy and Bruce wrote in and said about halfway through the show, no subject line, just the email that says, that man is an idiot. Clearly, you're going to have to be more specific. That's the story for tonight. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Keep writing in.